Mark pulled his trusty truck into the driveway just as the morning sun began to stretch its golden fingers over the quiet suburban street. It was a rare Saturday off from work, a day he had promised himself to relax and tackle simple chores, starting with washing his truck, a ritual that helped clear his mind and make his old vehicle shine like new. The neighborhood was waking up slowly. Children's laughter faint in the distance, neighbors stepping out to water their lawns or fetch morning coffee. Mark grabbed the hose from the garage, savoring the hiss of water rushing to life. He loved the way the sunlight caught the droplets, how the soap suds slid down the truck's frame, leaving the dusty residue of weeks gone. It wasn't just about cleanliness, it was pride. His truck was a symbol of his hard work, a loyal companion on every road trip and weekend adventure. What Mark didn't notice was the pair of eyes watching him from behind a thin veil of lace curtains across the street. Linda's gaze was sharp, almost predatory, fixed on Mark's every move. To an outsider, she was just another homeowner, diligently maintaining her yard or attending HOA meetings. But inside, Linda was something else entirely, a self-appointed guardian of community rules, armed with an encyclopedic knowledge of HOA covenants and a fierce devotion to order. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line as she watched Mark turn on the hose. The sound of water was ordinary enough, but in her mind, it was a signal, an act of defiance against the neighborhood's carefully crafted rules. She pulled out her phone, fingers trembling slightly, and began taking photos of Mark's truck. She had been waiting for this moment. Rumors had been swirling for weeks about Mark's rule-breaking habits. Washing his truck on the driveway? Clearly unacceptable in Linda's book. She wasn't alone in her obsession. Other residents had complained quietly, but no one had dared to take such a bold step. Linda felt a surge of righteous purpose. This wasn't just about a truck. It was about control, respect, and the delicate balance of power in their little community. Meanwhile, Mark was blissfully unaware of the brewing storm. He squirted soap onto a sponge, smiling to himself as he scrubbed a stubborn patch of dirt near the wheel well. The day was perfect, the kind of day where nothing could go wrong. He hummed softly, enjoying the rhythm of his work and the simple pleasure of caring for something he loved. But then a flicker in his peripheral vision caught his attention. Across the street, the curtains twitched as someone moved. He squinted, trying to see past the lace, but the figure was already retreating, phone now pressed to their ear. Mark's smile faltered, a strange unease creeping into his chest. Was someone watching him? Who was that? He shook off the feeling, telling himself it was just a neighbor curious about his truck or maybe checking on their own yard. But the seed of doubt had been planted. As Mark rinsed off the soap, unaware of the silent judgment just yards away, Linda was already dialing. Her voice was low but urgent, rehearsed from countless HOA meetings and private conversations. Yes, I'd like to report a violation. Someone washing a vehicle on their driveway. The calm morning shattered like a fragile glass. Linda lowered her phone slowly, the line still open. Her breath was steady, but her heart pounded with a thrill. She barely admitted even to herself. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. For months, Mark's quiet defiance had grated on her nerves. A truck washing itself on the driveway, it was more than just a minor infraction. To Linda, it was a challenge to the very order she upheld. She glanced out the window again, the lace curtains framing her sharp eyes like a spotlight on a stage. Mark was still at it, completely oblivious to the storm about to descend on his quiet morning. She pulled out her small notebook, already filled with notes from past encounters, dates, times, and the precise wording of HOA rules. Today's violation would be recorded meticulously. Linda wasn't just doing this for herself. She told herself it was for the neighborhood, the pristine lawns, the uniform fences, the quiet peace that made their little subdivision a sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world. But underneath that self-righteous veneer lay something more complicated. A simmering feud that had been quietly growing between her and Mark for months. It had started innocently enough. A misplaced trash bin here, a late holiday decoration there. But Mark's laid-back attitude and disregard for the smallest community guidelines chipped away at Linda's patience. She'd tried to speak to him, but the conversations always ended with Mark shrugging or rolling his eyes, dismissing her concerns as petty. That only fueled her resolve. Her phone buzzed, a message from another neighbor, Carla, who had noticed. The truck washing too. Carla was on Linda's side, a fierce supporter of strict HOA enforcement. "You're doing the right thing," the text read. "Let me know if you need backup." Linda smiled thinly and tucked the phone away. She had no doubt this was about to escalate. Across the street, Mark was finishing up, rubbing the last bit of soap off the tailgate. He felt a warm satisfaction as the truck gleamed under the sun. He was just about to put the hose away when he noticed the unusual silence in the neighborhood. The usual sounds, the birds, the distant lawnmowers, the chatter of kids, seemed to have paused. Curious, he looked up. Across the street, in Linda's yard, the curtains twitched again. He caught a glimpse of her silhouette, rigid and focused. Mark frowned. He knew Linda was strict, but this felt personal. Suddenly, a police car rolled slowly down the street, its lights off but unmistakable in the quiet. Mark's pulse quickened. He exchanged confused looks with his wife, who had stepped out the front door. Before Mark could react, two officers stepped out, walking toward him with a mix of caution and professionalism. The small crowd that had gathered behind them was silent, eyes wide with anticipation. Rumors had traveled fast in this neighborhood, and now the reality was unfolding right in front of them. "Good morning, sir," one officer said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "We received a call about a possible violation here. Can you tell us what's going on?" Mark blinked, searching for words. "I'm just washing my truck," he said flatly, the confusion clear in his voice. "Is that a problem?" The officers exchanged a quick glance. The second officer pulled out a small notepad, jotting down details. The complaint came in as a suspected violation of HOA rules about vehicle washing. "We're just here to check it out." Mark felt his jaw tighten. "I've washed my truck here for years. No one's ever said anything before." Behind the officers, Linda stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with vindication. "It's against the rules," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the street. "If we don't enforce them, the neighborhood will fall apart." The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. Mark's gaze locked with Linda's. In that moment, a silent war was declared, not just over a truck, but over control, respect, and the soul of their neighborhood. The officers stood stiffly between Mark and Linda, caught in the middle of an invisible tug-of-war that had simmered long before today. Mark's voice was calm but firm as he tried to explain. "I'm not trying to break any rules. I've checked. The HOA guidelines, and washing my truck here isn't prohibited." Linda's eyes flashed with disbelief. "You think it's okay to ignore the rules just because you want to?" Her voice was sharp, slicing through the quiet neighborhood air, like a blade. One officer cleared his throat, attempting to de-escalate. "Ma'am, we're here to make sure everything's safe and legal. The HOA rules aren't law enforcement matters. If there's a dispute, it's between neighbors and the HOA board." He looked at Mark. "Is the truck washing affecting anyone? Any water running off onto the street or your neighbor's property?" Mark shook his head. "No, it's all contained in my driveway. I'm careful about water use." But Linda wasn't satisfied. She shifted her stance, pulling out her phone again. "I called 911 because this is a violation of our community covenants, and it's an eyesore for the neighborhood. If we don't stop these little things, next thing you know, the whole community will be a mess." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gathered neighbors. Some nodded in agreement, others exchanged skeptical glances. The thin line between Community care and personal vendetta was blurring fast. Suddenly, the second officer's radio crackled. "Dispatch, we have a report of another possible violation nearby. Someone else is washing their car outside the approved area." The officer's eyes flicked back to the crowd. "Seems like this isn't isolated." The murmurs grew louder, tension thickening like fog. Mark felt the weight of eyes on him, many curious, some judgmental. This wasn't just about his truck anymore. It was about the community's fragile peace unraveling. Linda took a step closer, voice low but charged with certainty. "We have to set an example. If Mark gets away with this, others will follow." Mark clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to take care of my property the way I've always done." An elderly neighbor named Mrs. Henderson, standing at the edge of the crowd, raised her hand. Her voice trembled with years of wisdom and concern. "We've lived here for decades, and this neighborhood thrived because people respected each other's space. But maybe we need to be careful not to turn every small thing into a battle." Linda's glare shifted toward Mrs. Henderson. "Respect means following the rules, ma'am." Before things could escalate, the first officer raised his hand. "Let's not turn this into a neighborhood feud. We're here just to check if there's an emergency or illegal activity. There's none. We suggest resolving this with the HOA board." Mark breathed out slowly, tension easing slightly, but his frustration remaining. "Thank you, officers." As the police prepared to leave, Linda's phone buzzed again. She glanced down at the screen and her eyes widened. "Another complaint," she whispered, "about Mark leaving his trash bins out past the allowed time." A collective gasp echoed from the crowd. Mark's eyes narrowed. This was getting personal. Linda's voice dropped, a satisfied smirk tugging at her lips. "Maybe this is just the beginning." The officers exchanged looks, sensing the growing conflict. "We recommend the HOA board handle these issues. The police department isn't the place for neighbor disputes." The cars pulled away slowly, sirens silent, but the tension they left behind ringing louder than ever. The neighborhood was no longer just a peaceful place to live. It was a battleground. Mark locked his truck, his mind racing. He glanced across the street where Linda stood watching from behind her curtains, already preparing her next move. The silent war had begun. The fading taillights of the police cruiser left behind a thick silence, but the neighborhood's calm was shattered. Mark stood in his driveway, heart pounding, as the crowd slowly dispersed, whispering, exchanging glances, and processing the drama that had just unfolded. What was supposed to be a peaceful Saturday chore had exploded into a neighborhood spectacle. Linda, still standing proudly across the street, seemed to radiate victory. Her arms folded. Tightly, she surveyed the aftermath as if she'd just won a battle on some invisible front line. But beneath her composed exterior, her mind raced with possibilities. This was just the opening salvo. Mark's wife, Sarah, emerged from the house, her expression worried. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Mark nodded, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "Yeah, just unexpected." From the shadows of the nearby mailbox, Mr. Thompson, the neighborhood gossip, lurked with a sly grin. "Looks like things are heating up," he muttered to a neighbor. "I haven't seen a scene like this since the last annual barbecue disaster." But this was no barbecue drama. This was different. This was war. As the day wore on, the usual sounds of lawnmowers and children's play were replaced by hushed conversations on porches and behind hedges. Some neighbors took Mark's side, quietly, expressing sympathy for his frustration with the escalating tensions. Others nodded in agreement with Linda, believing that rules were rules, and without enforcement, the neighborhood's charm would decay. By late afternoon, the tension reached a boiling point when an official letter arrived in Mark's mailbox, stamped with the HOA logo and signed by the HOA president. The letter cited Mark for unauthorized vehicle washing on private property and demanded a hearing before the HOA board within 10 days. Failure to appear could result in fines. Mark felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The letter was formal, but the message was clear. This was far from over. Meanwhile, Linda circulated through the neighborhood, making quiet calls and dropping hints. "We have to protect our community," she told anyone who'd listen. "If we let one person flout the rules, it's the slippery slope," but not everyone agreed. At the community park, a small group gathered, voicing concerns about the harshness of the HOA's enforcement. "We're supposed to be neighbors, not enemies," said Carla, a mother of two and a longtime resident. "This isn't just about a truck. It's about how we treat each other." Back at Mark's house, the evening stretched long and restless. Mark sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter. The sense of invasion was suffocating. Washing, his truck, something so ordinary, had suddenly made him a pariah. Suddenly his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Watch your back. Not everyone wants you here." A chill ran down Mark's spine. Who was watching him now? How deep did this conflict run? The next morning, a new development awaited him. A flyer had been taped to his front door, bold letters screaming, "Rule breaker! Follow the covenants or pay the price." The signature? Just a scrawled L. Neighbors began to take sides openly. Conversations stopped when Mark or Linda walked by. Friendly greetings became strained nods. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, ready to boil over. Then came the call for the HOA board meeting, a chance for the neighborhood to confront the growing rift. The meeting would be held in the cramped clubhouse, where tempers were sure to flare and secrets could be exposed. Mark glanced out the window toward Linda's house. The curtains were drawn tight, but he could feel the weight of her gaze even. From across the street, the community was on edge, and no one knew what would happen next. The small, fluorescent-lit HOA clubhouse buzzed with tension as neighbors gathered for the meeting. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of anxious bodies. The room felt smaller than usual, like the air itself was closing in, heavy with frustration and anticipation. Mark sat near the back, flanked by a handful of supporters, neighbors who quietly whispered their sympathy and shared their own frustrations with the HOA's tightening grip. Across the room, Linda sat rigidly near the front, clutching a thick folder of documents, her face a mask of steely determination. The HOA president, Mr. Caldwell, called the meeting to order. His voice was firm but weary, knowing the community was divided like never before. "We're here to discuss the recent complaints regarding vehicle washing violations," he began. "Let's keep this civil." Linda wasted no time. She stood, voice clear and unwavering. "Mark has been blatantly disregarding our community covenants. It's not just about washing a truck. He's showing blatant disrespect for the rules that keep our neighborhood beautiful and safe. If we allow this, where does it end?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others frowned. Mark rose slowly, his eyes scanning the room. "I understand the importance of community guidelines," he said calmly. "But these rules were never meant to punish simple, harmless acts like washing a vehicle on your own driveway. I've checked the HOA documents thoroughly. There is no explicit rule against this." Linda shot back. "The spirit of the rules is to maintain property values and community standards. Your actions undermine that spirit." Before Mark could respond, a woman in the front row raised her hand. It was Carla, the neighbor who'd voiced concerns earlier. "Are we really here to police soap and water?" she asked, voice tinged with frustration. "What about bigger issues? Noise complaints, landscaping violations, unkempt yards? Why single out one person for something so minor?" Linda's jaw tightened. "Rules are rules. We enforce them evenly." But the room shifted uneasily. Several voices chimed in, agreeing with Carla, questioning the board's priorities. Then Mr. Caldwell raised his hand to restore order. We must focus on the issue at hand. However, I urge the board to consider the community's concerns about fairness and enforcement. Just as the atmosphere seemed ready to tip toward compromise, a sharp interruption came from the back. "It's not just about the truck washing," a voice said, cold and deliberate. All eyes turned to a tall man standing near the doorway, Tom, a longtime resident who rarely spoke in meetings. "There's something we've been hiding," he said. "Linda, haven't you been in violation of the HOA rules yourself?" Gasps echoed through the room. Linda's face flushed. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. But Tom held up a stack of photos, images of Linda's own fence, taller than the allowed height, creeping over into the neighbor's yard. Whispers turned to murmurs, then to outright chatter. The HOA president cleared his throat. If these allegations are true, they must be addressed. Linda's mask slipped for a moment. Her confidence faltered. A flush of anger and embarrassment rose, but she quickly masked it. "I'm happy to address any concerns at the proper time. This is about Mark's behavior today." But the damage was done. The room's energy shifted from confrontation to curiosity and skepticism. Questions about Linda's motives and credibility started to circulate quietly. Mark's supporters exchanged looks, sensing the tide might finally be turning. The meeting adjourned with no clear resolution, just promises to revisit the issues in the coming weeks. As neighbors filed out, Mark caught Linda's eye across the room. Her glare was icy, but beneath it flickered a hint of something else. Fear? Vulnerability? Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the neighborhood. The battle lines had been drawn, but the war was far from over. The days after, the HOA meeting felt like walking through a neighborhood caught in a thick fog, the kind that muffled sounds and blurred faces, making everyone seem distant, guarded. Mark noticed the cold shoulders, the hushed conversations that abruptly stopped whenever he approached. Even the once friendly waves from neighbors were replaced by cautious nods or total silence. At work, he found his mind wandering back to the meeting. Linda's accusations and the revelation about her own fence violation had stirred something deeper than just neighborly discord. The thin veil of civility had ripped away, exposing raw, festering tensions no one wanted to admit. One evening, Mark's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Carla. "You need to know the whole story. Meet me at the park after dark." Curiosity gnawed at Mark, but a flicker of unease crept in too. What could Carla possibly want to reveal that couldn't wait until daylight? When Mark arrived at the park, the faint glow of street lamps cast long, eerie shadows across the empty benches. Carla was already there, her face serious, her eyes darting nervously. "Thanks for coming," she whispered. "This isn't just about truck washing or fence heights. There's a lot more going on beneath the surface." Mark frowned, the chill of mystery settling in. "What do you mean?" Carla glanced around before speaking. "Linda's been playing a dangerous game, using the HOA rules as weapons to settle personal scores. But it's not just neighbors she's targeted." Mark's heart quickened. "What else?" "She's been involved in some shady dealings with the HOA board. Backroom deals, fines imposed unfairly, even threats against homeowners who don't fall in line." Carla's voice dropped lower. "Some people are afraid to speak out. That's why she's so relentless with you, because you dared to defy her." Mark absorbed this revelation, a knot tightening in his gut. The fight over his truck washing was a symptom of something much bigger: control, power, and fear wrapped in the guise of community standards. "Why are you telling me this?" Mark asked. Carla looked determined. "Because you're not alone. We're starting to organize. People are tired of living under fear and judgment, but we have to be careful. Linda's influence runs deep." Just then, a soft rustling came from the bushes nearby. Both of them froze, eyes scanning the darkness. Did you hear that? Carla whispered. Mark nodded slowly, the weight of the night pressing down. Whoever, or whatever, was out there, watching, reminded him just how much the stakes had risen. Back at home, Mark found no peace. The flyer signed L still clung to his door, a chilling reminder of the war unfolding. His wife, Sarah, urged caution. Maybe we should just comply, keep the peace. But Mark shook his head, resolute. If we give in now, it's never going to stop. The next day brought more surprises. A letter arrived in the mailbox, not from the HOA, but from the local government office. It cited a complaint about Mark's property violating environmental regulations due to excessive water runoff. Mark's mind raced. This was a new front, and it felt orchestrated. He called the government office to dispute the claim, but was met with a bureaucratic wall of paperwork and delays. It was clear this wasn't a simple coincidence. As days turned into nights filled with restless planning and whispered strategies, Mark realized this was no longer just about his truck. It was about reclaiming his home, his dignity, and the right to live without constant surveillance and intimidation. Across the street, Linda's lights flickered late into the night. Mark caught a glimpse of her silhouette moving behind the curtains, her expression unreadable. The silent war continued. The neighborhood, once a haven of quiet suburban peace, now felt like a powder keg, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite an explosion. Mark's resolve had only grown stronger, but so had the weight of the unseen forces arrayed against him. Word, spread quietly but deliberately. A town hall meeting was being called, not by the HOA, but by a coalition of residents fed up with the escalating conflict. Carla had become a key organizer, rallying neighbors who wanted transparency, fairness, and an end to the petty battles tearing their community apart. Mark found himself thrust into the spotlight. Some neighbors whispered support, others glared, with suspicion, as if he were the troublemaker they had long feared. The evening of the town hall arrived, and the community center filled with nervous energy. Chairs groaned as people settled in, faces illuminated by the harsh overhead lights. There was no HOA board in sight, just residents, neighbors looking to reclaim their neighborhood. Carla took the stage first, her voice steady but passionate. We're here to demand accountability, from the HOA, from our neighbors, and from ourselves. This conflict has gone too far. We need fairness and respect. Applause rippled through the room, but it was tinged with anxiety. Mark stepped forward. Next. I'm not here to stir trouble, he said. I just want to live in a community where rules are clear, fairly enforced, and where neighbors respect each other's rights. What started as a simple truck wash has become something much bigger. From the back of the room, a murmur arose. And then Linda stood, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Mark is twisting the story, she said sharply. Rules exist for a reason. Without enforcement, our property values and quality of life will suffer. A chorus of voices erupted, some defending Linda, others siding with Mark. The room became a cacophony of accusations, defenses, and shouted opinions. Amid the chaos, Mr. Caldwell, the HOA president, stood up, trying to restore order. We must find common ground, he urged. This division weakens us all. But it was clear the wounds ran deep. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door silenced the room. 2 uniformed officers entered, their presence immediately demanding attention. Due to recent complaints and safety concerns, we are here to inform you that the community is under a temporary investigation, one officer announced. Certain activities will be monitored to ensure compliance with local ordinances and regulations. Gasps and whispers spread like wildfire. Mark's heart pounded. The conflict was spiraling beyond HOA rules and neighborly disputes into legal scrutiny. Linda's eyes gleamed triumphantly, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. As the officers detailed the investigation, Mark realized the stakes had escalated beyond his control. The neighborhood's fragile peace was shattered, replaced by suspicion and fear. The town hall ended with no resolution, only promises of investigations, hearings, and more questions. Outside, the night sky was heavy with clouds, reflecting the storm gathering within the community. Mark looked around at the faces, friends, neighbors, adversaries, all caught in a web of conflict they never wanted. The real battle was just beginning. The investigation cast a shadow over the neighborhood, hanging heavy in the air like a storm about to break. Mark's world felt like it was unraveling, piece by piece, in ways he never anticipated. He found himself pacing late into the night, replaying every conversation, every accusation, searching for answers. The community center meeting had left, everyone shaken, the fragile bonds between neighbors frayed beyond recognition. Yet, beneath the surface, something was stirring, a quiet undercurrent of truth waiting to be revealed. One afternoon, as Mark returned home from work, he noticed a small envelope taped to his front door. No markings, no name, just a folded piece of paper inside. With cautious fingers, he unfolded it and read, "Truth lies beneath the surface. Look closer." Puzzled, Mark glanced around. No one in sight. A chill ran down his spine. Was this a warning, a clue, or a challenge? That night, unable to sleep, Mark stepped outside with a flashlight. His gaze drifted to the overgrown hedge separating his property from Linda's. Something about it caught his attention, a faint glimmer beneath the leaves. Curiosity piqued. He knelt and pushed aside the branches. There, half buried in dirt, was a small USB drive. His hands trembled as he plugged it into his laptop. A folder appeared. HOA secrets. Inside were documents, emails, and videos exposing a web of manipulation. Linda had been orchestrating more than just petty complaints. She was using the HOA board as a tool to control and intimidate neighbors who dared challenge her authority. There were records of forged complaints, secret meetings, and even attempts to coerce members into silence. The final video was the most damning, a recorded conversation where Linda admitted to fabricating violations to target Mark and others. Mark sat back, stunned. The quiet war had hidden darker battles beneath its surface. The next morning, armed with undeniable proof, Mark approached Mr. Caldwell and Carla. Together, they planned a special meeting to confront Linda and the HOA board with the evidence. The community gathered again, this time with a palpable sense of anticipation. Linda arrived, confident as ever, but that confidence faltered when Mark presented the files. Gasps echoed around the room. Linda's face paled as the evidence was laid bare. The mask slipped, revealing desperation. "I was only trying to protect our neighborhood," she exclaimed, voice cracking. But the room was unforgiving. The HOA board members faced calls for her immediate removal and a full investigation into the governance of the HOA. As the meeting closed, a new chapter began. The community pledged to rebuild trust, revise rules clearly, and foster transparency. Mark and Carla became leaders in this effort, determined to restore harmony. Later, Mark walked home beneath the quiet stars, the weight on his shoulders lighter. The battle had been fierce, but truth and courage had prevailed. Across the street, Linda's house sat dark, her influence finally fading like a shadow at dawn. Mark smiled softly, the neighborhood beginning to breathe again. A community not of fear and suspicion, but of respect and renewed hope.